I stood in that glass-walled office on the 14th floor of our Brooklyn building, my heart pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears. The morning sun was streaming through the windows, casting long shadows across the polished mahogany desk where our CEO sat, looking at me with an expression I'd never seen before. Not anger, not annoying, something worse. Fear. "Denise," he said, his voice dropping to barely above a whisper. "We got hacked yesterday." 3 words. Just 3 simple words that shattered everything I'd spent 22 years building. My name is Denise Carter, and I'm 46 years old. I've worked in financial services since I was 24, starting as an entry-level analyst in this very building. Back then, I was just a young woman from Queens with a degree in economics and a dream of helping people build real wealth, not quick money, but the kind of security that lasts generations. The kind my own parents never had. 22 years. That's how long it took me to climb from that cramped cubicle on the 3rd floor to the senior operations director's office with my name on the door. 22 years of 60-hour weeks of studying for certifications while my friends were out enjoying their 20s, of saying no to shortcuts and yes to doing things the right way, even when the right way was harder. And now, standing in that office with those 3 words hanging in the air between us, I felt all of it crumbling. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me take you back to where this really started, because the truth is, the warning signs were there long before that morning. I just didn't want to see them. It was 3 months earlier, on a Tuesday afternoon in late June. I remember because it was my mother's birthday, and I'd promised to leave early to take her to dinner. I was wrapping up some reports when I noticed something odd in our transaction logs. Nothing dramatic, just small delays in processing times, the kind of thing most people wouldn't even notice. But I've been doing this long enough to know that small problems don't stay small. They grow, they multiply, they hide bigger problems underneath. I pulled up the detailed reports and started digging. Transaction delays of 3 to 5 seconds. Not much, but consistent. And getting longer each week. I made a note to bring it up at our next operations meeting. That meeting happened on Friday. Our CEO, Richard Townsend, sat at the head of the conference table in his expensive suit, looking every bit at the confident leader who'd grown our firm from 20 employees to 200 over the past decade. He listened to my concerns with a patient smile. "Denise," he said, using that tone people use when they're about to dismiss what you just said, "you've always been thorough. That's why you're so valuable to this team. But you're also, sometimes, how do I say this, overly cautious. These minor delays are just growing pains. We're processing more transactions than ever. Our systems are adjusting. It's a good problem to have." Around the table, other executives nodded. Growing pains. A good problem to have. The kind of corporate speech that makes everything sound manageable, even when it isn't. I wanted to push back. Something in my gut told me to push back. But I also knew the politics of the room. Richard didn't like being questioned, especially not in front of the board members who sat to his right, especially not by someone who'd worked their way up from the bottom instead of arriving with an MBA from some fancy school. So I nodded. I said, "You're probably right." And I hated myself a little bit for it, but I didn't stop watching. I couldn't. It's not in my nature to ignore problems just because someone told me to. My mama raised me better than that. She used to tell me, "Denise, baby, when something feels wrong, it usually is wrong. Trust your gut. God gave you a brain for a reason." Over the next few weeks, I kept my own private logs. The delays were getting worse. 5 seconds became 8. 8 became 12. And then there were the missing transaction records. Not many, just a few here and there. Easy to miss if you weren't looking closely. I was looking closely. In July, we started getting calls from clients. Nervous calls. "Is everything okay with my account? Why can't I access my portfolio online? I tried to make a transfer yesterday and it still hasn't gone through." Each time we had answers. Technical difficulties, system upgrades, nothing to worry about. We'd resolve it within 24 hours. Except we didn't always resolve it within 24 hours. Sometimes it took 48, sometimes 72. And the clients who called were usually the small ones, the local entrepreneurs and families who didn't have millions in assets, the ones we could afford to make wait a little longer. I brought this up to Richard again in August, this time in a private meeting. Just the two of us in his office, the same office where I'd later hear those 3 terrible words. "Richard," I said, keeping my voice professional, "we need to talk about what's happening with our systems. These aren't just delaying anymore. We're losing client trust, and I'm seeing gaps in our security protocols." He looked at me across his desk, and for a moment I saw something flicker in his eyes. Worry, maybe, or guilt. But it passed quickly. "Denise," he said, leaning back in his leather chair, "I appreciate your diligence. I really do. But we've hired the best IT team in the city. They assure me everything is fine. The delays are temporary. We're upgrading our infrastructure to handle our growth. In 6 months, we'll be operating better than ever." "But what about now?" I pressed. "What about the clients who are scared? What about the security gaps?" "There are no security gaps," he said firmly. "Our systems are state-of-the-art. We pass every audit. We follow every regulation. You need to trust that I know what I'm doing here." I left that meeting feeling dismissed, feeling like I was being paranoid, feeling like maybe I was the problem for not being able to just accept what I was being told. But that night, I went home to my small apartment in Park Slope, and I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about all the people who trusted us with their money, the restaurant owner in Bed-Stuy who'd saved for 20 years to buy his building. The teacher from the Bronx is putting money away for her daughter's college. The retired nurse who'd worked double shifts for decades and now depended on her investments for medical bills. These weren't abstract numbers on a screen. They were real people. People like my parents who'd worked themselves to the bone and still barely made it. People who couldn't afford to lose what they'd worked for. So I did something I'd never done before in my 22 years at the firm. I made copies of everything: transaction logs, security reports, client complaint records. I didn't know what I was going to do with them. I just knew I needed to have them. September came, and things got worse, much worse. The delays were now averaging 15 to 20 seconds. We had daily complaints from clients. Our IT team was working around the clock, but they couldn't seem to fix whatever was wrong. And Richard was becoming increasingly short-tempered with anyone who brought up concerns. Then, on a Wednesday morning in mid-September, everything crashed. Not just delayed, crashed. Our entire system went offline for 6 hours. 6 hours where clients couldn't access their accounts, couldn't make trades, couldn't do anything. 6 hours of pure chaos. When the system came back online, Richard called an emergency meeting, all senior staff. He stood at the front of the conference room, looking tired, but still projecting that CEO confidence. "Obviously, today was unacceptable," he said. "But our IT team has identified the problem, a corrupted software update. They've fixed it. We've implemented new protocols to ensure this doesn't happen again. We'll be sending a message to all clients explaining what happened and offering our apologies." "What about compensation?" I asked. "Some of our clients lost significant trading opportunities today. The market was up 2%. "We'll handle that on a case-by-case basis," Richard replied. "But let's not get ahead of ourselves. Most of our clients are long-term investors. One day of downtime isn't going to affect their portfolios materially. Except it wasn't just one day. It was months of small failures building up to one spectacular one. And I was starting to realize something that made my stomach turn. Richard wasn't ignorant of the problems. He was actively choosing to ignore them. That night, I did something else I'd never done before. I called my old mentor, Bernard Washington. Bernard had been the operations director before me, and he retired 5 years ago. He was 72 now, living in a nice condo in Harlem, enjoying his pension and his grandchildren. We met for coffee the next morning at a small cafe near Columbia University. "Denise," he said, giving me that warm smile that had guided me through so many difficult decisions over the years. "It's good to see you, but I can tell from your voice on the phone that this isn't a social call." I told him everything. The delays, the crashes, the missing records, Richard's dismissals. The growing fear in my gut was that something was very, very wrong. Bernard listened without interrupting, his weathered hands wrapped around his coffee cup. When I finished, he was quiet for a long moment. "Let me ask you something," he finally said. "Have you reviewed your insurance policies lately? The company's policies?" The question caught me off guard. "Insurance? Bernard, I'm talking about system failures and client complaints. What does insurance have to do with it?" He smiled sadly. "Everything, child, everything. When I was operations director, one of my jobs was making sure we had proper coverage. Not just the basic liability insurance, but business interruption insurance, cyber liability insurance, professional indemnity insurance. The kind of policies that protect not just the company, but the employees and the clients when things go wrong." "And?" I asked, though I was starting to understand where this was going. And I'm guessing Richard let those policies lapse or reduce the coverage to save money. Am I right? I didn't know. That's what scared me. I'd been so focused on the operational side that I'd never thought to check the insurance side. It wasn't my department. Except in a failing company, everything becomes everyone's department. "Denise," Bernard said, reaching across the table to take my hand, "I'm going to tell you something I've learned in 40 years of doing this work. Companies don't fail because of bad luck. They fail because of bad decisions. And the worst decisions are the ones that prioritize short-term growth over long-term security. Richard's been growing this firm fast. Too fast, maybe. And when you grow too fast, you start cutting corners you don't even realize you're cutting." "What should I do?" I asked, and I heard the desperation in my own voice. "Check the policies," he said simply. "All of them. Business interruption, cyber liability, professional indemnity, errors and omissions. See what coverage we actually have. And then, if what you find scares you, you need to make a decision about whether you're willing to go down with the ship or whether you're going to be the one who sounds the alarm." I spent the next week digging through our insurance records. What I found was worse than I'd imagined. Our business interruption insurance, which should have covered loss of income if our systems went down, hadn't been updated in 7 years. The coverage amount was based on our revenue from 2016. We were now processing 10 times that volume. Our cyber liability insurance had a coverage cap of $2 million. In today's world, with today's threats, a serious breach could cost 10 times that, 20 times that. Our professional indemnity insurance, which covered claims from clients if we mishandled their money, had an exclusions clause so long and so detailed that it basically excluded everything except the most obvious cases of gross negligence. And our errors and omissions insurance hadn't been reviewed or updated since Richard became CEO. In other words, we were a disaster waiting to happen, and if that disaster came, we'd be completely unprepared to handle it. I made an appointment to see Richard, a formal appointment scheduled through his assistant. I wanted there to be a record of this conversation. That brings us back to where we started, that glass-walled office, that bright September morning, me standing there with a folder full of insurance documents. Richard was sitting behind his desk, looking at me with that expression I couldn't quite read. "Richard," I began, "we need to talk about our insurance coverage." He sighed. "Denise, not this again. We've been over this. We're adequately covered." "No," I said, and my voice was firmer than I'd expected. "We're not. I've reviewed every policy. Our coverage is outdated, inadequate, and in some cases practically worthless if something serious happens." "Nothing serious is going to happen," he interrupted. "How do you know that?" I demanded. "How can you possibly know that? We've been having system problems for months. We had a 6-hour crash last week. We have gaps in our security that a first-year IT student could identify, and you're sitting here telling me nothing serious is going to happen." He stood up abruptly, his chair rolling back and hitting the window behind him with a soft thud. For a moment, I thought he was going to yell at me, fire me maybe. Instead, he walked to the window and stood there with his back to me, looking out over Brooklyn. When he spoke, his voice was quiet, defeated. "Denise, do you know how much it would cost to update all those policies to the levels you're suggesting? To get adequate business interruption coverage for our current volume? To increase our cyber liability limits? To eliminate the exclusions in our professional indemnity insurance?" "No," I admitted, "but I can find out." $2.3 million, he said, still not turning around, per year. I had the quotes done 18 months ago. Do you know what our profit margin was last year? I didn't answer. $3.1 million, he continued. Updating those policies would eat up almost all of our profit. The board would never approve it. They'd say we're being too conservative. They'd say other firms operate with similar coverage. They'd say we need to prioritize growth. "And what are you going to say?" I asked quietly. "When something happens and we can't cover it?" He turned to face me then, and I saw it clearly. The fear I'd glimpsed before. The knowledge that he'd made a terrible mistake. The understanding that he'd prioritized profit over protection, growth over security, and now it was too late to go back. "Denise," he said, and his voice cracked slightly, "we got hacked yesterday." The room seemed to tilt. I grabbed the back of the chair in front of me to steady myself. "What?" I whispered. "We got hacked. Yesterday afternoon, around 3 o'clock. Our IT team discovered it this morning. They've been working all night to figure out the extent of it." And the word came out as barely more than breath. "And it's bad. They got into our client database. Names, addresses, social security numbers, and account numbers. Everything. We don't know yet if they actually transferred any money, but they had access to everything for at least 24 hours, maybe longer." I sat down heavily in the chair, my mind racing. "How many clients?" "All of them. Every single one." "Have you reported it?" "It is still assessing. We need to know the full scope before we report to the SEC and notify clients." "Richard," I said, and I was surprised by how calm my voice sounded. "That's not how this works. We have legal obligations, time limits. We need to notify within 72 hours. "I know that," he snapped. Then more quietly, "I know that. But if we report now, before we know everything, the panic could destroy us. Clients will pull their money. The board will demand my resignation. The regulators will swarm us. We'll be finished." I looked at him. This man I'd worked with, for years. This man who'd promoted me, who'd trusted me with more responsibility than I'd ever imagined having. And I saw him clearly for the first time. Not as a leader, but as someone who'd been so focused on building something impressive that he'd forgotten to build something solid. "Richard," I said slowly, "we're already finished if we don't handle this right. The only question is whether we finish with our integrity intact or whether we finish as criminals who tried to cover up a breach." He collapsed back into his chair, his head in his hands. "What do I do?" And that's when I realized something. He was asking me. The CEO of a 200-person firm, the man with the corner office and the impressive salary, was asking me, the girl from Queens who'd worked her way up from the bottom, what to do. I took a deep breath. "First, we call our lawyers. Right now, before we leave this office. Second, we notify the board. Today. Third, we file the necessary reports with the SEC. Fourth, we prepare to notify every single client. And fifth, we start preparing for what comes next." "What comes next?" he asked, looking up at me with red eyes. "Lawsuits, investigations, probably criminal charges if we don't handle this transparently. Definitely regulatory sanctions, client departures, maybe bankruptcy." "Jesus," he whispered. "Or," I said, We could do something different. He looked at me, a flicker of hope in his eyes. What? We could tell the truth. All of it. Not just about the hack, but about everything. The system problems we've been having, the outdated insurance, the corners we've been cutting. We could be completely transparent, face the consequences head on, and show everyone, clients, regulators, the public, that we're willing to do whatever it takes to make this right. That's crazy, he said. That would destroy us faster than anything. Maybe, I admitted, or maybe it would save us. Because right now, the one thing we have left is the ability to choose how this story gets told. We can be the villains who tried to hide a breach, or we can be the company that made mistakes, owned them, and fought like hell to protect their clients even when it meant sacrificing themselves. He stared at me for a long moment. Then he picked up his phone. "Get me Linda Hawkins," he said to his assistant. Linda was our chief legal counsel. "Tell her it's an emergency, and get the board on a conference call for this afternoon, all of them. I don't care what they're doing." The next 72 hours were the longest of my life. Lawyers flying in from Manhattan. Board meetings lasted until midnight. Emergency calls with regulators. IT teams are working around the clock to secure our systems and figure out exactly what has been compromised. And then came the hardest part, calling the clients. We decided I would lead that effort. Richard would handle the regulators and the press, but I would be the one to personally call our largest clients and explain what had happened. The first call was to Thomas Reynolds, the restaurant owner from Bed-Stuy. He'd been with us for 15 years, had nearly $500,000 invested with us. Money he'd saved dollar by dollar, working 18-hour days, never taking a vacation. Also, he could own his building outright and pass something down to his kids. "Mr. Reynolds," I said when he answered, my voice shaking despite my attempts to control it. "This is Denise Carter from the firm. I need to talk to you about something serious." I told him everything. The hack, the compromised data, inadequate insurance, the steps we were taking to make it right. I didn't sugarcoat anything. I didn't make promises I couldn't keep. I just told him the truth. When I finished, there was a long silence on the other end of the line. "Miss Carter," he finally said, and his voice was rough with emotion. "I'm going to tell you something. I've been in business for 30 years, and in those 30 years, I've learned that everybody makes mistakes. Everybody has problems. What separates the good businesses from the bad ones isn't whether they have problems. It's how they handle them when they come." "Mr. Reynolds, let me finish," he said gently. "You could have hidden this from me. You could have let me find out from the news or from a letter sent by lawyers, but you called me yourself. You told me the truth, even though it was hard, even though you knew I might pull my money and never come back. That takes courage, and I respect that." I felt tears welling up in my eyes. "Thank you. Now, I'm still scared," he admitted, "and I'm going to be watching everything you do very carefully, but I'm not pulling my money, not yet. I'm going to give you a chance to make this right." Not every call went that well. Some clients yelled. Some cried. Some quietly said they'd be transferring their accounts. I couldn't blame them. We'd failed them. No matter how honest we were now, we'd still failed to protect what they'd trusted us with. But here's what I learned during those calls. Something that changed how I thought about business, about trust, about success itself. Most people don't expect perfection. They expect honesty. They expect you to make your own mistakes. They expect you to do everything in your power to make things right. And if you can give them that, if you can show them that you value their trust more than if you value your pride, many of them will give you a second chance. Not all of them, but enough. The next few months were brutal. The SEC investigation, the lawsuits, 3 class action suits filed within the first month, the media coverage, some of it fair, much of it sensationalized, the employees who left scared of their own careers and futures. But Richard, to his credit, did exactly what I'd suggested. He told the truth. All of it. In interviews, in depositions, in press conferences, he admitted he'd prioritized growth over security. He admitted he'd ignored warning signs. He admitted he'd been wrong, and he fired himself. At a board meeting in November, 3 months after the hack, Richard stood up and announced he was stepping down as CEO. This company needs leadership that understands the importance of security, of proper protocols, of doing things right instead of doing them fast, he said, and I've proven I'm not that leader. The board voted unanimously to accept his resignation, and then, to my complete shock, they voted to offer me the position. I almost said no. The company was still in crisis. We were losing money every month. Half of our clients had left. We were facing potential fines that could bankrupt us. Who would want to captain a sinking ship? But then I thought about Thomas Reynolds, the restaurant owner who'd given us a second chance. I thought about the employees who'd stayed despite everything because they believed in what we were supposed to stand for. I thought about Bernard Washington, my mentor, who taught me that the time to show your character is when things are hardest, not when they're easy. And I thought about my parents, both of them gone now, who'd worked their entire lives without ever having the security or the protection they deserved, who'd never had someone fight for them the way I could fight for our clients. So I said yes. My first act as CEO was to do something that made the board extremely uncomfortable. I hired an independent firm to audit every single one of our policies, procedures, and insurance coverages, and I told them I wanted complete transparency. I wanted them to find every weakness, every gap, every place where we'd cut corners or made dangerous assumptions. The report, when it came back 6 weeks later, was devastating. Page after page of failures, inadequate business interruption insurance, cyber liability coverage with massive gaps, professional indemnity insurance that was essentially worthless because of exclusion clauses, no proper inflation protection clauses to ensure our coverage keeps pace with our growth, grace period clauses that were too short, renewal clauses that were unfavorable. The cost to fix all of it? $4.2 million in annual premiums, more than our entire previous year's profit. I presented the findings to the board, along with my recommendation to implement every single one of the suggested changes. "You understand what you're asking," the board chairman said. "This will make us unprofitable for the next 2 years at least. Our competitors will grow while we're paying for insurance. Shareholders will be furious." "Our competitors," I said quietly, "are one breach away from being where we are right now. The difference is we've already learned this lesson. We've already paid the price for cutting corners. We have a choice now. We can go back to doing things the cheap way, the fast way, and hope we get lucky. Or we can do things the right way, knowing that security isn't cheap, protection isn't optional, and our clients' trust is worth more than short-term profits." There was a long silence around the conference table. "And if the shareholders don't like it?" someone asked. "Then they should sell," I said simply. "Because this is the company we're going to be now. One that prioritizes protection over profit. One that believes success isn't just about how much money you make, but about how well you protect what people trust you with." The vote was closer than I would have liked, but it passed. Over the next year, we will rebuild everything. New systems, new protocols, new insurance policies that actually covered the risks we faced. We hired a full-time compliance officer. We brought in cybersecurity consultants. We implemented training programs for every employee on security, on ethics, and on the importance of doing things right. And slowly, painfully, slowly, we started to recover. The lawsuits were settled, mostly because we were so transparent about what had happened and what we were doing to fix it. The SEC fines were substantial, but manageable, because we'd cooperated fully with their investigation. Some clients came back. New clients came to us specifically because they'd heard about how we'd handled the crisis. We weren't the biggest firm anymore. We weren't the fastest growing, but we were becoming something better. We were becoming trusted. It's been 3 years now since that morning in Richard's office. 3 years since those 3 terrible words shattered my world. The company is profitable again, though not as profitable as it once was. We have 220 employees, just slightly more than before the hack. Our client base is about 70% of what it was at our peak. But here's what's different. Every single one of those clients knows exactly what happened. They know we failed, they know we learned, and they chose to stay or to come to us because they trust that if something goes wrong again, we'll handle it the right way. I still work long hours. I'm still in that office in Brooklyn, though now it's the corner office on the 15th floor. I still worry about whether we're doing enough, whether we're prepared enough, and whether we're protecting our clients as well as we should. But I sleep better now than I did in those months before the hack when I knew something was wrong but didn't know what. Because now, we're not pretending everything is fine. We're not cutting corners. We're not prioritizing growth over security. We're doing it right, even when right is harder, even when the right is more expensive, even when the right means growing slower than our competitors. Last week, I got a call from a young woman named Lisa Chen. She'd just been promoted to operations director at a mid-sized investment firm in Manhattan. She'd heard about what happened to us, about how we'd handled it, about the changes we'd made. She wanted advice. "I'm seeing warning signs at my company," she told me. "Small things, delays, system glitches. My CEO keeps telling me not to worry, but I'm worried. What should I do?" I smiled, though she couldn't see it through the phone. "Let me tell you a story," I said, "about a woman who ignored her instincts until it was almost too late, about what it costs to learn that security isn't weakness, that protection isn't paranoia, and that sometimes the bravest thing you can do is tell the truth, even when everyone wants you to stay quiet." And I told her everything, all of it. Because that's what we do now. We share our mistakes. We help others avoid the same ones. We build a community of people who understand that true success isn't about being the biggest or the richest or the fastest growing. It's about being trustworthy. It's about protecting what people trust you with. It's about doing right even when right is hard. Earlier today, I was reviewing our quarterly insurance renewal. All of our policies are up to date now. Business interruption insurance with proper inflation protection clauses, cyber liability insurance with comprehensive coverage and reasonable grace periods, professional indemnity insurance with clear terms and minimal exclusions, disability insurance for key employees with waiver of premium clauses, critical illness insurance for our senior staff. We even have life insurance policies to protect the families of our employees if something happens to them. It was expensive. Last year, we paid just over $4 million in insurance premiums. That's money that could have gone to bonuses, to expansion, to making shareholders happy. But you know what? I sleep at night. And so do our clients. And so do our employees, because they know that if something goes wrong, we're prepared. Not perfectly prepared. Nothing can protect against everything, but responsibly prepared. That restaurant owner, Thomas Reynolds, is still with us. His account has actually grown. Last month, he brought his daughter in to open her own investment account. She's taking over the restaurant business, and she wanted to work with the same firm her father trusted. "Miss Carter," he said to me that day, shaking my hand in my office. "My daughter asked me why I stayed with you after everything that happened. You know what I told her?" I shook my head. I told her that anyone can be a good partner when things are going well. The real test is who stands by you when things go wrong. And more importantly, who admits when they're wrong, who fights to make it right, and who does everything in their power to make sure it doesn't happen again. That's the kind of partner worth having. Those words meant more to me than any profit report, any growth metric, any industry award ever could. So let me ask you something. Have you ever faced a moment as I did? A moment when you knew something was wrong, when you saw the warning signs, but you didn't speak up because it seemed easier to stay quiet. Have you ever worked for a company or run a company that prioritized growth over protection, speed over security, profit over people? If you have, I want you to know something. It's never too late to change course. It's never too late to start doing things right. Yes, it will be expensive. Yes, it will be hard. Yes, you might grow slower than your competitors. Yes, people might question your decisions. But here's what I learned in the hardest way possible. Success built on shortcuts isn't real success. It's just a house of cards waiting for the wind to blow. Real success, lasting success, meaningful success comes from doing things right even when right is harder. It comes from proper insurance, not just checking the box, but really understanding what you're covered for and what you're not. Business interruption insurance that actually covers your real revenue. Cyber liability insurance reflects real threats. Professional indemnity, insurance with clear terms. Inflation protection clauses, so your coverage grows with your business. Grace period clauses give you time to make decisions. Waiver of premium clauses that protect you when things get tough. Renewal clauses that give you flexibility and choice. It comes from being honest with your clients, even when honesty is terrifying, especially when honesty is terrifying. It comes from valuing your employees, not just as workers, but as people whose lives and families depend on the decisions you make. It comes from understanding that protection isn't a cost, it's an investment in stability, in trust, in the ability to weather storms instead of being destroyed by them. The hack that destroyed our company also saved it. It forced us to confront every shortcut we'd taken, every corner we'd cut, every false assumption we'd made about what success really means. It taught me that courage isn't about being fearless. It's about being afraid and doing the right thing anyway. I'm 49 now. I've been CEO for 3 years. I'll probably never make as much money as I would have if I'd gone to work for one of those high-flying firms that prioritize growth above all else. My company will probably never make the fastest growing lists or the most profitable rankings. But you know what we will do? We'll make it through the next crisis. We'll protect our clients when things go wrong. We'll sleep at night knowing we did everything we could to be responsible stewards of what people trusted us with. And to me, that's worth more than any corner office, any salary, any industry recognition. So, I want to leave you with this question. What kind of success are you building? Are you building the kind that looks impressive but crumbles when tested? Or are you building the kind that lasts, that protects, that honors the trust people place in you? Because one day you'll face your own crisis. Everyone does. And when that day comes, the only thing that will matter is whether you are prepared, whether you did things right, even when right was harder, whether you valued protection over profit and people over growth. I hope you'll choose wisely. I hope you'll learn from my mistakes without having to make them yourself. I hope you'll be brave enough to speak up when you see warning signs, even when it's uncomfortable, even when people tell you you're too cautious, too worried, too careful. Because caution isn't weak. Protection isn't paranoia. And doing things right, truly right, is the bravest thing you can do in a world that constantly pressures you to cut corners, move faster, prioritize profit. That's my story. That's what I learned when I confronted my CEO and heard those 3 terrible words that changed everything. Now I want to hear yours. Have you ever faced a crisis that taught you the importance of doing things right? Have you ever ignored warning signs and paid the price? Have you ever had to make the choice between what was easy and what was right? Share your story in the comments below. Let's build a community of people who understand that real success isn't about shortcuts. It's about doing the hard work of building something solid, something trustworthy, something that lasts. And if this story resonated with you, if it made you think about your own business or your own career or your own decisions, I'd be honored if you'd subscribe to this channel. Every week I share stories like this, stories about real people facing real challenges in business, in finance, in life, stories about courage, about integrity, about learning to do things right even when right is hard. Because we're all in this together, All of us try to build something meaningful, to protect what matters, to leave something behind that we can be proud of. And the more we share our stories, our mistakes, our lessons learned, the stronger we all become. Thank you for listening. Thank you for being here. And remember, it's never too late to start doing things right. It's never too late to choose protection over shortcuts, honesty over convenience, and integrity over easy profits. The question is, will you? I stood at the window of my office last Tuesday, looking out over Brooklyn as the sun set behind the Manhattan skyline, painting everything in shades of gold and amber. My phone buzzed with a text from my niece, Keisha. She'd just graduated from business school and was starting her first job at a consulting firm next week. "Aunt Denise, can I take you to lunch this weekend? I want to ask you about something." I smiled and texted back immediately. "Of course, baby. Saturday at noon. You pick the place." Saturday came, and we met at a small Ethiopian restaurant in Fort Greene, one of those places where the food is incredible, but the decor is nothing fancy. Keisha arrived wearing a crisp navy suit, her natural hair pulled back in a neat bun, looking every bit the professional she was about to become. We ordered, and then she leaned forward, her hands clasped on the table. "Aunt Denise," she began, "I've been thinking a lot about your story, about what happened with the hack and how you rebuilt everything, and I'm scared." "Scared of what, honey?" "Scared that I'm going to end up in a situation like that, where I see something wrong, but I don't speak up because I'm new, because I don't have power, because people might think I'm being difficult." She paused, her eyes filling with tears. "I don't want to be a coward, but I also don't want to lose my job before I even start." I reached across the table and took her hand. "Let me tell you something nobody told me when I was starting out, something I wish I'd understood 20 years earlier than I did." She nodded, waiting. Speaking up isn't about having power. It's about having clarity, and clarity comes from knowledge. You want to know the real reason I was able to stand up to Richard that day? It wasn't because I was brave. It was because I knew exactly what the problems were. I had documentation, I had facts, I had specifics. I wasn't working on gut feeling alone, I had evidence. "But how do you get that evidence when you're just starting?" Keisha asked. "How do you even know what to look for?" "You learn," I said simply. "You study. You ask questions. You build relationships with people who know more than you do. You read the policies, the procedures, the contracts. You understand how things are supposed to work so you can recognize when they're not working." Our food arrived and we ate in comfortable silence for a few minutes. Then Keisha spoke again. "The consulting firm I'm joining has this whole pitch about disruption and innovation and moving fast. They talk about how the old ways of doing business are obsolete, how insurance and regulations and all that stuff just slow companies down." I set down my fork and looked at her seriously. "Keisha, let me tell you what I've learned about disruption and innovation. Real innovation isn't about ignoring the fundamentals. It's about building something new on a solid foundation. Any fool can move fast and break things. That's not innovation. That's just recklessness dressed up in fancy language." But everyone in business school talked about how you have to be willing to take risks. "There's a difference," I interrupted gently, "between calculated risks and stupid risks. A calculated risk is when you understand the downside, you've prepared for it as much as possible, and you've made a conscious decision that the potential upside is worth it. A stupid risk is when you ignore the downside, pretend it won't happen to you, and hope for the best." "How do you tell the difference?" "Ask yourself 3 questions," I said, holding up. 3 fingers. 1. What's the worst that could happen? 2. If the worst happens, can we survive it? 3. Have we done everything reasonably to prevent it or minimize it? She pulled out her phone and started typing notes. "If you can't answer those 3 questions honestly," I continued, "then you're not taking a calculated risk. You're just gambling. And honey, gambling with other people's money, other people's livelihoods, other people's trust, that's not business. That's betrayal. Keisha looked up from her phone. Is that what Richard was doing? Gambling? Not intentionally, I said. At least, I don't think so. I think he genuinely believed everything would be fine. He believed in his own optimism. He believed that bad things happen to other companies, not to well-run companies like ours. He believed that spending money on insurance and security was just a tax on success, money that could be better used for growth. And you didn't believe that? I thought about it for a moment. I wanted to believe it, I admitted. It would have been so much easier to believe it. But my parents taught me something important. They worked their whole lives, both of them, and they never had security. Every month was a struggle. One medical emergency, one car breakdown, one unexpected expense, and they were scrambling. And I remember thinking, even as a kid, that there had to be a better way, that adults shouldn't have to live with that kind of constant fear. So, when I grew up, I continued, I promised myself I would build something different. I would help people have security, real security, not the illusion of security, but the actual thing. And I realized you can't have real security without protection, without insurance, without planning, without preparation for when things go wrong. Keisha was quiet for a moment, processing. The people at my firm, they're going to think I'm old-fashioned if I talk like this, aren't they? Maybe, I said. Or maybe they'll respect you for understanding something they don't. You know what I've noticed about the business world? The people who mock caution are usually the ones who've never experienced a real crisis. They're like teenagers who think they're invincible because nothing bad has happened to them yet. But the people who've actually survived a crisis, they understand. Did everyone at your company understand? After the hack? I laughed, but it was a bitter sound. No, not everyone. We lost about 40 employees in the first 6 months after I became CEO. Some of them couldn't handle the uncertainty. Some of them got better offers elsewhere. And some of them honestly disagreed with the direction I was taking the company. What did they disagree about? They thought I was overreacting. They thought spending $4 million a year on insurance was excessive. They thought all the new protocols and procedures were just bureaucracy that would slow us down. They wanted to get back to normal, to the way things were before. Were they wrong? Keisha asked. Yes, I said firmly, because normal was what got us into trouble in the first place. You can't go back to normal when normal was broken. You have to build a new normal, a better one. But that's scary, Keisha said softly. Building something new when you don't know if it will work. Terrifying, I agreed. There were nights I couldn't sleep. Nights I lay awake wondering if I was making the right decisions. Wondering if the board would fire me. Wondering if we'd still be in business in a year. What kept you going? I thought about it carefully. The people who stayed, I said finally. The clients who gave us another chance. The employees who believed in what we were trying to build. Thomas Reynolds, that restaurant owner I told you about. There was this moment, maybe 6 months after I became CEO, when I was really struggling. We'd just gotten hit with another lawsuit. The legal fees were crushing us. I was seriously considering whether I should just resign, let someone else deal with the mess. What happened? Thomas called me, said he wanted to talk. I thought he was pulling out his money, and I couldn't blame him. But when I met him at his restaurant, you know what he said? Keisha shook her head. He said, Miss Carter, I've been watching you these past few months, and I've been watching how you handle this crisis, and I want you to know something. My restaurant has been broken into 3 times. I've had employees steal from me. I've had suppliers cheat me. I've had health inspectors try to shake me down, and every single time I had a choice. I could give up, or I could figure out how to do things better. I paused, remembering that conversation like it was yesterday. He told me, the mark of a good business person isn't whether they avoid problems, it's whether they solve them. And then he wrote me a check. A check? For $50,000. An additional investment in the company. He said he believed in what we were building and he wanted to be part of it. Not just as a client, but as an investor. Keisha's eyes widened. And did you take it? Not at first, I said. I tried to talk him out of it. I told him we might still fail. I told him about all the lawsuits and the uncertainty and the risk, but he just smiled and said, Miss Carter, I've been taking risks my whole life. The only difference is, now I'm taking a risk on someone I trust. So you took the money. I took the money, I confirmed, and 6 other clients did the same thing, smaller amounts, but it added up. By the time we'd finished that round of emergency fundraising, we had $320,000 from our own clients, people who believed in us, people who understood that we were trying to do things right. That must have felt incredible, Keisha said. It felt like responsibility, I corrected her. Every dollar they gave us was a dollar they could have put somewhere safer, somewhere easier. They were betting on us, on me, and I couldn't let them down. Our server came by to clear our plates and offer dessert. We both declined but ordered coffee. Aunt Denise, Keisha said when the server left, can I ask you something personal? Of course. Do you ever regret it? Taking the CEO position, all the stress and the lawsuits and the sleepless nights? Do you ever wish you just stayed operations director? Or maybe even left and gone to another company where you didn't have to deal with all of this? I didn't answer immediately. It was a fair question, one I'd asked myself many times. There's a concept in psychology, I finally said, called post-traumatic growth. It's the idea that sometimes going through something terrible can actually make you stronger. Not because the terrible thing was good, but because overcoming it taught you something you couldn't have learned any other way. And you experienced that. I did, I said. The hack, the crisis, taking over as CEO, all of it was the hardest thing I've ever been through. Harder than my parents dying, harder than anything. But it also taught me who I really am, what I'm capable of, what I believe in. And it taught me that doing the right thing, even when it's expensive and difficult and unpopular, that's what gives life meaning. So you don't regret it. I don't regret it, I confirmed. I grieve for what we lost, the clients who left, the employees who got hurt, the trust that was broken. But I don't regret choosing to rebuild it the right way. Because now, 3 years later, I can look at myself in the mirror. I can look at our clients in the eye. I can tell new employees with complete honesty that we value integrity over profit, and I mean it. Keisha was quiet, absorbing all of this. What about your personal life? She asked. I know you've always been focused on work. Did you ever, think about whether there's more to life than business? I smiled. You sound like your mother. She asks me that every Thanksgiving. Because she's worried about you. I know, I said. And she's right to worry. I've sacrificed a lot for this career. I never married, never had kids. I've missed family events, birthdays, weddings. There have been times when I've wondered if it was worth it. And I've realized that there's no one right answer to how to live a life. Some people find meaning in family. Some find it in creative pursuits. Some find it in service. I found mine in building something that helps people feel secure, in protecting people who might otherwise be vulnerable, in showing that you can be successful without being ruthless. But don't you get lonely? Sometimes, I admitted, but I'm not alone. I have family, friends, colleagues I respect. I have mentees like you who I hope will carry these lessons forward. I have clients like Thomas Reynolds who've become friends. It's not a traditional life, but it's mine, and it's enough. The coffee arrived, and we both took grateful skips. Keisha, I said, you asked me at the beginning of this lunch if you'd be a coward if you didn't speak up when you saw something wrong. Let me tell you something about courage. She leaned forward, listening intently. Courage isn't the absence of fear. It's not being fearless. It's being afraid and doing what needs to be done anyway. When I confronted Richard that morning, I was terrified. My hands were shaking. My voice was shaking. I thought he might fire me on the spot. But I did it anyway because staying silent would have been worse than any consequence he could have imposed. But how do you know when to speak up and when to wait? When you're new, when you don't have all the information. You start small, I said. You ask questions, not accusations, just genuine questions. Can you help me understand why we do it this way? I noticed something that confused me. Could you explain it? I'm learning about insurance requirements, and I'm wondering if our coverage is up to date. You build your knowledge base. You build relationships. You establish yourself as someone thoughtful and thorough, not someone reckless or difficult. And then if you do see something seriously wrong, you document it, carefully, thoroughly. You make sure you understand the situation completely before you sound the alarm. Because if you're going to challenge the status quo, you need to be right. You need to have done your homework. That makes sense, Keisha said. But here's the most important thing, I continued. You can't let fear of consequences stop you from doing what's right. Yes, you might lose your job. Yes, people might think you're difficult. Yes, it might hurt your career in the short term. But living with yourself, knowing you stayed silent when you could have prevented harm, that's a price you'll pay every single day for the rest of your life. Keisha's eyes were shining with tears now. You're talking about integrity. I'm talking about integrity, I confirmed. And integrity isn't just about the big moments, the dramatic confrontations. It's about the small choices you make every single day, the shortcut you refuse to take, the questionable practice you decline to participate in, the truth you tell even when a lie would be easier. That sounds exhausting. I laughed. It is exhausting, but you know what's more exhausting? Trying to remember all your lies, trying to sleep at night knowing you're part of something wrong, trying to look at yourself in the mirror when you've compromised your values for comfort or money or approval. We finished our coffee in companionable silence. Finally, Keisha spoke again. Aunt Denise, I want to be like you when I grow up. I felt my eyes filling with tears. Baby, be better than me. Learn from my mistakes without having to make them yourself. Speak up earlier. Trust your instincts sooner. Don't wait 22 years to say what needs to be said. I'll try, she promised. And remember, I added, you're not alone in this. When things get hard, when you're not sure what to do, reach out. To me, to your mother, to mentors and friends. Nobody builds a career alone. Nobody develops courage alone. We need each other. We paid the bill and walked out into the bright Saturday afternoon. The streets of Fort Greene were alive with people enjoying the weekend. Families, couples, friends laughing together, the whole beautiful mess of human life. Aunt Denise, Keisha said as we hugged goodbye on the sidewalk, thank you for lunch, for advice, for everything. Thank you for asking, I said. For caring enough to think about these things before you have to face them. That's wisdom, baby. That's the kind of wisdom that's going to serve you well. I watched her walk away toward the subway, this brilliant young woman about to start her career, and I felt hopeful. Hopefully her generation would do better than mine did, that they'd ask the hard questions earlier, value protection over shortcuts, choose integrity over convenience. My phone rang as I was walking to my car. It was Jeremy Foster, one of our newer clients. He started with us just 6 months ago, a small tech entrepreneur building his first company. Denise, he said, sounding stressed, I'm sorry to bother you on a Saturday, but I'm freaking out. I just got a quote for business interruption insurance, and it's way more expensive than I expected. My accountant says I should skip it and just self-insure. What do you think? I smiled, even though he couldn't see it. Jeremy, let me tell you a story about why that's exactly the wrong decision. And as I stood there on the sidewalk in Brooklyn, explaining to this nervous entrepreneur why protection matters more than profit, why preparation beats optimism, Why doing things right is always worth the cost, I realized something. This was my life's work, not just managing investments or growing wealth. Teaching people that security isn't something you achieve by getting lucky and avoiding problems. It's something you build deliberately, carefully, by making the right choices even when those choices are expensive. So you're saying I should pay the premium, Jeremy said when I finished. I'm saying you should sleep at night, I replied. How much is that worth to you? He laughed, some of the tension leaving his voice. Okay, you've convinced me. I'll sign up for the full coverage. Good man, I said. Now go enjoy your Saturday. And Jeremy, thank you. For what? For asking. For caring enough to make the right decision. For being the kind of business owner this world needs more of. After we hung up, I drove home through the streets of Brooklyn, past the restaurant where Thomas Reynolds still served the best jerk chicken in the borough, past the corner where Bernard Washington used to live before he moved to Harlem, past all the familiar landmarks of a life built one decision at a time. When I got home, I made myself a cup of tea and sat down at my dining table with my laptop. I had emails to answer, reports to review, and decisions to make. The work never really ended. But for once, I didn't mind, because I knew something I hadn't known 3 years ago. I knew that every email I answered with honesty, every report I reviewed with thoroughness, every decision I made with integrity was building something that mattered. Not just a business, but a legacy. Not just wealth, but security. Not just success, but meaning. And that night, for the first time in years, I slept without nightmares, without anxiety, without fear, because I was finally, truly doing it right. 3 years have passed since that lunch with Keisha. She's now a senior consultant at her firm, known for her thorough analysis and her unwillingness to cut corners. She's become exactly the kind of business leader I hoped she would be. Last month, she called me with exciting news. Her firm had been hired by a company facing a potential crisis, system failures, inadequate insurance, and a CEO in denial. And they'd asked for her specifically because word had spread about her approach. Thorough, honest, unafraid to deliver hard truths. Aunt Denise, she said on the phone, I told them our first step has to be a complete insurance audit. Business interruption, cyber liability, professional indemnity, all of it. The CEO pushed back, said it would take too long, cost too much, but I stood on my ground. And you know what? What? He agreed. Because I showed him what happened to your company. I told him your story, and he realized he didn't want to be Richard Townsend. He wanted to be Denise Carter. I felt tears in my eyes. That's good, baby. That's really good. I learned from the best, she said. After we hung up, I thought about that conversation for a long time, about how one story, one crisis, one decision to do things right could ripple outward in ways you never anticipated, how the hardest moments of your life could become the most valuable lessons you pass on. That's why I'm sharing this with you today. Not because my story is exceptional, lots of people face crises, lots of people make hard decisions, but because I want you to understand something fundamental. The business world will tell you that success comes from being aggressive, from moving fast and breaking things, from prioritizing growth above all else. The business world will tell you that insurance is a cost, that regulations are burdens, and that preparation is for people who lack confidence. The business world is wrong. Real success, lasting success, meaningful success comes from doing things right. From protecting what people trust you with, from having the courage to slow down, to prepare, to invest in security even when the investment feels expensive. It comes from understanding that business interruption insurance isn't about expecting failure. It's about respecting reality. That cyber liability coverage isn't paranoia, it's responsibility. That professional indemnity insurance isn't in doubt, it's integrity. That inflation protection clauses aren't pessimism, it's planning. Those grace periods aren't weaknesses, they're wisdom. That proper renewal terms aren't complex. They're controlled. Most of all, it comes from understanding that the people who trust you with their money, their businesses, their futures, deserve more than empty promises and optimistic assumptions. They deserve preparation. They deserve protection. They deserve to know that if something goes wrong, you will be ready. So I'll ask you one more time. What kind of success are you building? Are you building the kind that looks impressive but crumbles under pressure? Or are you building the kind that lasts, that protects, that honors trust? The choice is yours. But choose wisely. Because one day, something will go wrong. A crisis will come. And on that day, the only thing that will matter is whether you are prepared, whether you did it right, even when right was hard, especially when right was hard. That's my story. That's my truth. That's the lesson I learned when I confronted my CEO and heard those 3 terrible words. Now it's your turn. Share your story. Share your struggles. Share your victories. Let's build a community of people who understand that integrity isn't old-fashioned, preparation isn't paranoia, and doing things right is always, always worth it. Subscribe if you want more stories like this. Comment if you've faced similar choices. Reach out if you need advice. Because we're all in this together, all of us trying to build something that matters, trying to do right in a world that often rewards wrong, trying to be the kind of leaders, the kind of people we'd want others to be. Thank you for listening. Thank you for being here. And remember, it's never too late to start doing things right. Question is, will you start today?